Hi, Merry Christmas, fellow ship modelers. It's John Thompson. I have a new project I started. I had a very good Christmas this year, and I actually started working on kind of an old model that I've built a couple times before, but this time it's a little bit different. What I was doing was I'm working on a paper model of Schreiber Bogen's Vaterland model, and this is going to be basically a paper model, but I'm going to build her as one of the sister ships. In this case, I'm building the Bismarck, which was the third sister ship that would have sailed under Hamburg, America, but wound up being transferred to the British after World War One to become the RMS Majestic. So this is her as Bismarck. Now, I did find historical pictures of her in HAPAG livery in active service. From what I can gather, she must have been in active service for a few years. But here's the model. As you can see, it's a waterline model, basically. And I encountered several challenges and experiences in this one that were applied from building previous models. And among those were basically, I had encountered an issue in the hull right about aft here, right about this point. I would put the stern on and then the bow, and then I would have a 16th inch gap, 16th to an 1/8 inch gap, which I basically had to copy a section from in here, and then I filled it in to fill the gap. And it worked. It was actually pretty effective way to go about doing it. Although this time I approached it a little bit differently. What I did was I glued the skins together to the actual length. And when I went to put it together, it went together perfectly. So I did not have a seam along the hull here, or I should say a gap along the hull, where the skins joined. Now, there were a couple of challenges too I faced, mainly also in this area here. I had to redo a bulkhead forward, about the second level. That had to be redone. So nothing is more discouraging than having to redo something. Although the bulkhead was there, the original one is still under there. What I did was I fabricated a new one and used the old photocopier and basically copied the elements that I needed, mainly the portholes and the watertight doors. So it's a replacement. It's not the exact replacement because the watertight doors did have portholes in them. However, I basically wanted something quick that would easily fix that, so I did that. Now, another problem I encountered, as I bring this better into focus here, a couple more problems. I had developed an issue here, and what had happened was, if I show you, let's see, hold this back a little bit, there we go. If I show you what happens here, if you look at an overhead view of the hull, you're going to notice that it's nice and straight. What happened was it sort of bent a little bit to the port side. So what I had to do was I had to cut apart the framing that I had glued together, reglue it, and then essentially wound up having to basically patch the deck. Now, in the efforts to fix this, I tore half the deck. So ultimately, what happened was I was very lucky because it tore in a place where most of the damage was covered by a piece of superstructure, which was very good. Where this crane platform is here, is where it was covered. So it was in this area here. So I've reduced the gap considerably, and it's barely visible. And I'm going to probably put a lifeboat, I'll put an extra boat or two over that, so you won't even see it at all when it's done. So that'll be one of the big things. Now, another thing I've also noticed about this is with this assembly forward, I put these parts, the bulkheads, in after I put in the hull skins, and there was a reason for that. This model does not have the best tolerances, so you have to be very careful in this. And I had to basically refit this whole area in here. So I glued the pieces in and aligned them with the bulkheads on this edge here. So that way the assembly worked, and that was it. So now I do have a little bit of filling, a tiny bit of filling to do on the deck here, which it's a very small gap, maybe about, say, probably about 1/16 to 1/8 of an inch. So I'm going to photocopy some decking and fill that in. So hopefully that'll cover that. Now the other challenge I want to point out to you too, if you want to contemplate building this kit is actually harder than it looks. It's deceptively simple. And so what I wanted to point out to you was, when doing these stern skins, you have to be very, very careful of working and forming them. Now you can try to form them beforehand, but you have to glue them to the frames. And essentially this part here, because it's one piece, this section here has to be bent in. And when I glued this to the middle skin here on the hull to gain that length, because I also attached it here, and I also attached this to the bow skin. So essentially it was one long piece when I finished. The important thing was making sure that I had it aligned on the bottom here at the waterline, as well as the tops of the decks to keep it straight. Generally, it was pretty much straight and true frame. There was some issues inside. I had some pieces maybe that were slightly askew, but not to the point where it was going to affect the appearance of the model. This is basically, I would have it glued in place, and of course, naturally, if you use a lot of glue, the piece will tend to shift a little bit as the glue dries. I've also weighted this down, which kept the hull reasonably straight. I weighted it down on my table, and that kind of helped a little bit to keep the hull straight. I know putting this deck on up here helps to make it a very rigid and sturdy model. And then, of course, when you put the skins on, it gets even much more rigid and stable. The key is not to use too much white glue when joining. If you get the paper too wet, you then have the tendency to get warps in your model. And also remember to weigh down the assemblies. Allow them dry about a good hour or so, and you'll be surprised how much better a result you'll get. Another thing I noticed was with this deck here and the back here, this whole assembly here was very different from when I built the Leviathan. In fact, it came out a lot better. I had the same problem when I did Leviathan and when I did the original Vaterland model. So that basically was good. Now, there are some misses in the kit. I mentioned about getting the parts to align. Now, I had to align the bow skins with where the bridge is, because that's a critical alignment point in the model. So again, that affected where that whole piece moved and shifted forward 1/8 of an inch, where the boats are here on the bow. This piece had moved actually 1/8 of an inch forward from where 16 to 1/8 of an inch forward. So you have to basically be very careful when looking at things like that. And there's going to be issues up here in the superstructure because I encountered them when I built the Leviathan. So I'm going to have to do a little bit of adjustment here and there on that. But this is going to be a kit that you basically have to fiddle around with. The directions are terrible. All they give you is just a illustration. This part goes here. You don't really go into it too much. They do recommend that you do a numbered assembly. However, there's a problem with that. This is another numbered piece here, and this is actually a higher numbered piece. I had to put this in before I put this in. Now, I had to put this in last in the decks because of the fact that it was so critical to the curvature of this particular part. So that meant that that had to be correct. Now, when I go to build then the rest of it, it'll all align perfectly. And there's a line here that was on the bottom of the skins here. And so what that meant was that the part had to basically align, the top of this skin here had to align with that line. So that was kind of a bit of a trick there to try to get that to work. So you know, it takes a while. This is about 3 days worth of model building. I'm doing this sort of kind of basically in between Christmas and New Year's while looking for work. Uh, but again, this is the kind of kit, it needs patience. And you also have to look beyond the instructions too and have experience. I recommend building a few of these. Basically, if you're going to get into paper modeling, but there is an alternative for this type of a stern here. This is called a shelf stern. And I would recommend a couple of manufacturers that make paper models that are a little easier to work with. One of them is JSC. They have a version of the Mauritania where this piece here, this angled piece here, this is actually a separate piece on the stern that you apply. So it does help when doing your compound curves, and this is a nightmare to do. So it requires a lot of gluing, and unfortunately, once you put the skins on, you don't have access from underneath the model. So it makes it a little tougher to physically get the glue on all the tabs that you need. You have to glue and then work in a couple places. I found out by doing a tack method of gluing that usually helps. So this is about where I'm at. And so there'll be other videos to follow on this, but I just kind of wanted to put something out there on building the Schreiber Bogen Vaterland model kit in case anybody wanted to see anything, because I didn't see anything on YouTube about it. Anyway, have a great day and Merry Christmas.